start big picture, I think it's important to realize that at the end of the Industrial Revolution, I shouldn't even say at the end of it, but at the height of the Industrial Revolution, you have all these people moving off of farms, moving out of rural communities. The chaos of liberal democratic capitalism that has generated all of this wealth now needs to be reined in and controlled by experts. These were the people who said, aha, we figured it out. History isn't just one damn thing after another. It's really this evolutionary, Darwinian. This was the idea whose time has come. All of these ideas seem to be gelling around this one conviction that the best and the brightest and the smartest and the most strong-willed could do better than freedom and markets and democracy.
Progressives were the original big government liberals in America. If you want to look to the ancestors of the people that we call liberals today, the people who tend to look to government to solve every human problem, it was the original progressives.
Other than the mail and excise taxes, the federal government was invisible in most people's lives in the early 1900s.
I think the founding father of American progressivism is Woodrow Wilson. Most people look at Teddy Roosevelt, who's the obvious national progressive, a person who ran under the Progressive Party banner in 1912, ran under the Progressive Party platform.
Wilson, far more than Roosevelt, is a true egghead. He is a true academic, a true intellectual. He thinks he knows more than everybody else.
He was heavily influenced at university and in his graduate work by people who had come from Germany, people who were educated in Germany, people who had imbibed all of the German state theory that was so popular in the middle of the 19th century. He began to look at government as something that was evolving, something that was organic, something that was alive. All of these people were educated at the top institutions of higher learning in this country, and those places had as faculty folks who had been educated in these progressive ideas in Europe.
Roosevelt felt he knew more than everybody else. I feel it in my gut, but he could be persuaded he's wrong, and he's deeply patriotic. I never get the sense from Wilson that he's deeply patriotic, that he loves this country. So he's the first progressive president, and he intends to change American society without going through the steps that the founders set up to change American society.
And the idea that Wilson came away with, again, was that you could have the perfectibility of mankind, you could plan and solve problems with government. And these ideas made, to Wilson, the Constitution seem very outmoded.
The early Wilson administration implemented several independent regulatory commissions, not run by Congress so much, but run by experts who don't have to run for re-election. Who can exercise vast amounts of power in an unaccountable way. Progressives thought that a good thing.
Many of the most religious people, the social gospel movement, they saw this new intellectual fad of progressivism, and they basically bent it to Christianity. It's no coincidence that the communists, the Nazis, the fascists, the progressives, all of them promised to deliver a kingdom of heaven on earth. Powerful forces are arguing that that Jesus was the first socialist, that he was the first eugenicist. Everyone is trying to bend Christianity to the scientific and industrial and economic revolutions that are coming, and what you end up getting is a heresy.
Wilson believed that inequalities were tragic in society.
He was a deeply religious man. He was the son of a minister brought up in a serious religious household. And so he had a real sense of divine mission.
Redistributing the wealth was one way to get wealth from people who had a surplus to people who had too little.
Well, the whole progressive model of redistribution cuts directly against the founders' understanding of property rights.
Freedom meant it's a right that you are endowed with by your Creator. No government can give you freedom. Certain inalienable rights come with that freedom: life, liberty, property.
Progressives knew that that understanding of rights was an obstacle to the kind of government they had in mind. They were for redistribution of wealth.
Wealthy people have too much. It needs to be taken away. So sometimes you get high taxes on wealth.
It's really greed and envy. You want to levy taxes on the rich because you really deep down hate the rich and you're envious of them and you want to take their money. Just be honest about it.
I would argue the central idea of American liberalism or American progressivism, whatever you want to call it, is the idea of the moral equivalent of war.
Things will work in a war that never will work in peacetime, because in a war people are willing to sacrifice. They're willing to do without civil rights very temporarily for their survival.
The role of Bismarck's Germany, which was this Prussian, military, regimented society, was huge on the minds of American progressive intellectuals. And so you have like the New Republic, which is essentially founded to support Teddy Roosevelt and his war policies and all of that, leaps headlong into supporting Woodrow Wilson, his opponent. That's why that phrase, "we planned in war," was so important. They were saying, hey, we planned in war. See, the planning was so good. That's why we need this moral equivalent of war now in the 1920s to copy what we were doing back then.
Wilson moves ahead with his progressivism to try and change America, and he is, of course, greatly aided with this in the war. And the war gives him the cover to silence almost all critics across the board.
You have goons arresting people in public, you have political prisoners, you have censorship, you have war socialism, you have big business and government colluding, you have ideology and propaganda and all that kind of stuff going on. And the Americans, because they are fundamentally a liberty-loving people, reject all that and embrace the return to normalcy.
Woodrow Wilson used to talk about the Constitution as something that if it didn't adapt, if we couldn't read it flexibly, if we couldn't read it liberally, it would perish, and we would perish.
There's no question he is among the first to take this view that it's okay if we modify or change the Constitution without the amendment process or outside of the amendment process.
The reason why they came to look at the Constitution that way is because they understood, they knew that the original Constitution, if it was to be interpreted as it was written, was a huge roadblock to the progressive policy agenda.
Under Wilson, they were telling people what to do. They were forcing people to march in lockstep. They were, putting out propaganda and arresting dissidents and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, as quick as you can bat an eye, the war ends and the American people say, enough of that.
In the 1920s, progressive professors had students, but they were out of fashion with the governments, with Washington. So Coolidge didn't care about them.
In the 1920s, Presidents Harding and Coolidge shifted. They were not progressives. And they approached the problem of economic development very differently. They did not accept the progressive view that government could solve many economic problems.
So what do you do when you're lonely and you might not get tenure and nobody's treating you with quite the respect that you think you deserve? Well, you go on a junket. You go overseas to a place where your ideas are more common, more successful, more welcome.
So where do they look? Well, the two places they look the most are the Soviet Union and fascist Italy, because these are the two places where totalitarianism is in fact on the march.
Senior Union people didn't approve of the Soviet Union and they wouldn't go, but Junior Union people went, and they all went over and they studied the Soviet Union. They thought, wow, this country's doing it. Our ideas are popular here.
One great example of this is, Lincoln Steffens, who is one of the most famous muckraking journalists of all time. He famously goes to the Soviet Union and he comes back and says, I have been to the future and it works. You had progressives in both parties. And one of the leading progressives in the Republican Party was Herbert Hoover. In fact, Herbert Hoover was a supporter of the Progressive Party in 1916, was going to be on the ticket with FDR in 1920 for a while. He was a major player in Wilson's administration. He was the guy who was the food administrator who put everybody in the country on a food ration. Hoover promised that he was going to take that planning skill and apply it to the country.
We had a booming economy in the 1920s. Herbert Hoover came in, and President Hoover was committed to various progressive ideas.
Hoover spent, and you see a lot of spending programs under Hoover.
President Roosevelt was a very charismatic figure. He had been governor of New York and was ideally situated to run for the presidency in 1932.
The program of the New Deal is progressivism. It is the implementation of progressive ideology. Progressivism's success comes in the New Deal.
The self-described progressives by the late 1930s, early 1940s are basically a bunch of Stalinist lickspittles. And meanwhile, people like FDR, they call themselves liberals. The word liberal used to mean maximizing freedom. The word liberal used to mean limited government. The word liberal used to mean Enlightenment values. Instead of the things that you are free to do on your own, liberal comes to mean the things the government is going to give you. So when people complain, oh, you're saying, you think liberalism is all about big government? It is all about big government in the sense that it's all about making the role of government, making the role of the state bigger in our lives.
I think the founders would have said, let's let people pursue their self-interest. Let's allow them to pursue what they do best.
Progressives believe that massive government is necessary and that people are perfectible. They believe in a planned economy. They believe in high taxes. They believe in redistributing wealth. And so it's very hard for those progressives to live with the failure that their economic policies bring.
The tax policies of the left, they don't affect people like John Kerry or Barack Obama or Bill Clinton. Regardless of how high our taxes are, those people aren't, their way of life is not going to be substantially affected. This is one of the most dangerous things you can have in government, where the people making the laws don't then themselves have to feel the effects of the laws.
Both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama talk about how we really want to restore the progressive movement and restore this, this sense that we're all going to be in it together. And unity is a okay thing, right? But it's basically morally neutral. If you read the Federalist Papers, it's all about the importance of holding off the threat of unity. Right? I mean, that's why we have checks and balances. That's why we have divided government. We have three branches all pitted against each other. What they were worried about is people just getting all mobbed up in their heads and trying to impose a sense of unity on everybody. And, so when I hear the sort of we are the ones we've been waiting for kind of rhetoric that comes out of the Obama administration, it makes me nervous because that's not our political tradition. You get this sense from a lot of progressives today. I don't think they're evil and I don't think they're Nazis or communists or any of that kind of stuff. But I do think that they are sort of fed up with liberal democratic capitalism, and they have the better way of doing things. And that's why I'm very proud to pick a fight with them.